Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props. This is part 2 in my Mari Lwyd project. Now, I'd received a message about my pronunciation of this tradition, and throughout my research, I found it to be called Mari Lwyd and Mari Lwyd, depending on where you hail from. Now, the thing I think is great is if you're wanting to walk around with a giant horse skull, looking to play games and get drunk, it doesn't matter how you pronounce it, as long as you're having fun. And if you'd like to learn more about this tradition, I do have some links down in the video description. In this part 2 video, I'm going to take that base structure from part 1 and really make it look like a skull by utilizing foam clay, different painting techniques, and distressing it. I'm also going to be doing some traditional things to this skull, like adding ornaments for the eyes, a crown, ribbons and bells, and of course, a shroud. So I want to show you what it takes to finish this project off. Let's go ahead and get started. To smooth out the transitional sections on the skull, I'm going to be utilizing some foam clay. This is an air dry material that you can attach to the foam just using some water. This is going to do the heavy lifting for a lot of the organic textures that I want the final look to have. After it has been applied to the surface, I'll then use my fingers or various sculpting tools to help smooth it out. And lucky for me, I was a guest at a convention out in Kansas City, so I could work on the skull at my booth. Now, when working with foam clay, I prefer to work with it in multiple thin layers versus applying it thick. Because it is air drying, the thinner the material is, the quicker the moisture will wick out. So when I got back to my shop, I could start applying additional layers that I thought might be a little more delicate, like around the eye sockets. Another thing that I felt was very important for this step was to have lots of reference images. So off to the side of my workbench, I have 2 monitors with a bunch of horse skulls, all from different angles. And because it is an organic skull, I don't have to get all the details perfect. I'm just trying to get generalized landmarks from what I'm seeing in the references. Hopefully this also shows you why I made the base structure the way I did. I knew that while creating the original templates, I was going to be doing a bunch of build out utilizing foam clay. And another thing to note while working with foam clay is that it will shrink about 10% once the moisture goes out. And because of that, I apply more material than necessary. But when it comes to sculpting, I'm also more of a subtractive sculptor, so that having excess material is great because then I can refine the shapes by sanding and using my rotary tool. After I'm satisfied with how all the details are applied, I'm then going to let this sit for at least a day. Because the foam clay had been applied thin, it is now skinned over and started to dry. So I can start sanding it by hand, and I'm going to be using some double-sided sandpaper from my buddy Mark, also known as the Wood Whisperer. And I'll be sure to leave a link to his page down in the description. Now, foam clay sands really well, so not a lot of pressure is needed. What I'm trying to do here is just knock down the high points to help smooth out the surface, but the little random divots in the clay are going to pop when I add paint. Switching over to my rotary tool, I can then refine areas using a little more force. So in this case, I'm going to be opening up the eye sockets because I'm going to be putting some ornaments in here later on. I also go through and smooth any of the additional transitions in between the HD foam and the foam clay. Here's where the magic starts to happen. A wire brush is your best friend to make foam look like bone. I start by scraping it across the surface, and that's going to add some striations to both the foam and the clay. I'll then go and start to forcibly pat the surface with the ends of the bristles. This technique will add pores to the skull and give it a lot more believable look. I mean, just check out this awesome texture around the eyes. Now, a lot of these distressing techniques can be overdone, so my recommendation would be to just go around the whole skull once and then go back and pick out specific spots to further distress. I'm also going to use a heat tool set to max, and while that's warming up, I take some 400 grit sandpaper and I start to smooth out more of the foam clay. This will knock down some of the striations left by the wire brush. Because I'm heating foam, I'm definitely wearing my respirator, and what I'm going to do with this heat tool is add all of the holes that horse skulls have. And looking at my references, there are numerous divots on the sides and the top of the skull. I also use the heat tool to add a little variation to the skull segment seams. It's these small little details that really help sell the believability. I mean, by the time this thing is painted, you would never guess that it was just made out of foam. For my ears, I like for them to look as though they've been made out of metal. So after rounding the sides with my rotary tool, I'm going to be using some tin foil to add some textures. Heat is applied to the front and the back of each ear, and while the foam is still warm, the tin foil can be pressed into the surface. This is going to emboss the foam, giving it a really awesome texture. With my skull distressed and weathered, I can now disassemble it for primer and paint. And to prime my surface, I'm going to be applying 2 light coats of Plasti-Dip. From here, I'm going to be dusting on some base colors, including Krylon Red Oxide, Tan Camouflage, and a Valspar Flat White. These colors are going to give me a decent base for additional hand painting. After my paints have dried, the first thing I'm going to do is apply a wash to the entire surface using some Liquitex Heavy Body Raw Sienna. For this process, I'm going to be using a 1-inch mop brush and a bunch of water. I want this pigment to run down into all of the details that I've scribed into the surface. And while the paint is still wet, I use a damp paper towel to mop up additional moisture. This helps to tint the entire skull, but you can still see those initial colors underneath. Next up, I'm going to be picking out the highlights and dry brushing the surface using some Liquitex Heavy Body Unbleached Titanium. I'm utilizing the same 1-inch mop brush, but this time around I'm adding no water to the paint. I'm just trying to catch the highlights. I don't want it to run down into the details where I applied the raw sienna. You'll also notice that I vary my technique from dry brushing to stippling as well. Changing your brush techniques like that helps give it more of an organic feel. Plus, if you do have any visible brush strokes, this is going to help alleviate them. After the main pass is done, I'll then switch over to a smaller filbert brush, and I do add a little bit of water to the paint. This will allow me to pick out certain sections and make them look more weather-worn and smooth. As a final highlight to the skull, I'm going to be using some Liquitex Heavy Body Parchment, but this time I'm being even more selective and even thinking about light sources from above. A lot of these painting techniques are possible because I buy good brushes. Cheaper brushes with harder bristles have a harder time making the paint go down this smooth. So when it comes to art supplies, the saying is true, you get what you pay for. That's the same reason why I use heavy body pigments on all of my props. At first they appear to be more expensive than the basic line, but because they have a higher pigment count, they cover so much better, which allows you to use less paint overall for better coverage when compared to cheaper brands. Like I'd mentioned earlier, I want my ears to look metallic, so I'm going to mix together some Liquitex Burnt Sienna and Mars Black. This is going to be the base color for the ears underneath the metallics. For my metallics, I'm going to be using Golden Brand Iridescent Bronze. This is painted on with a filbert brush, and I apply just enough pressure to hit the raised areas from the tinfoil technique. And here you can see how those textures came out great. To give the skull's eyes a unique look, I'm going to be cutting down ornaments. These are going to be inserted into the socket, and then hot glue is applied to the back side. For the crown, I found some holiday garland that looked really good, so I cut it down to the size I needed and then zip tied it into a circle. Traditionally, crafters usually used a bed sheet, but I picked up some cheap white fabric from the craft store. I cut a small slit down the middle so I could wrap it around the support at the back of the skull and then safety pin it into place. I then took my second piece and wrapped it through the jaw connections to hide the front, but it still gives the actor enough space to see out. Various ribbons were then fed through and wrapped around the crown. I wanted to attach multiple bells to the crown so that when the actor moved the horse's head, it would jingle. It was at this point that a friend messaged me and let me know that they usually used mare skulls for this tradition, so I decided to remove the canines from my skull. Luckily, because it's foam, it's an easy procedure. I was able to cut them off with a knife, sand them down with my rotary tool, and then repaint them using the unbleached titanium and parchment. Of course, adding the ribbons and the crown and the bells is going to be different for each and every builder. And that's the awesome thing about this build, is that you can change any of these accessories to make it unique for you. The other thing that I love is because the skull is made completely out of foam, the skull with all of the accessories and the pole only weighs in at 2.5 pounds. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this project and you got to see an awesome Christmas tradition outside of the US. And hopefully you have the opportunity to put one of these together in time for the holidays. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD Foam.